My name is Olivia Smith and I will be showing at the Florida State Fair in February. Today, I am going to be talking about quality and yield grading. This is important because it helps us determine the market's needs and satisfy those needs based on the efficiency of each carcass. Quality grading is relatively the easier of the two because it depends on visual appraisal. USDA meat inspectors have 4 basic grades to choose from: prime, choice, select, and standard. Within these grades are further breakdowns, such as high choice, moderate choice, and low choice. We decide these based on marbling, known as the intramuscular fat seen in the ribeye, and the maturity of the carcass. Now, let's go over some visuals. These are select cuts of ribeye. As you can see in this picture, we have a high select ribeye, and in this a low. We determine this based on the marbling that you can see throughout the ribeye, where here it's a little more dispersed, where in this one it's less. You can see that it's not as abundant as in this one. Here we have some good examples of some choice ribeyes. Starting with the high, we have a good amount of marbling and it's well dispersed amount around the steak. The moderate, there's a little less and it's still decently dispersed. And moving on to the low, we can see that we have a significantly less amount of marbling when compared to our high choice steak. These ribeyes are usually found in your regular grocery store and in restaurants, but only the high and moderate ribeyes can qualify for premiums. Moving on to our next slide, we have prime steaks, where in the high, we can see a lot of marbling and it's a good amount of flex. Moving on to the moderately, it's less marbling but still looks pretty good, and in the low prime you can see that the marbling is not as much as the high or moderate, and still looks better than a choice though. Let's move on to some examples and see if we can accurately grade them. Starting here with steak number 1, as you can see that there is a good amount of marbling. It's okay, but pretty dispersed, not too strong. This is only going to fall as a low choice. Steak number 2, you can see that there's almost no marbling, just like little trace amounts. So this is going to fall as a high select. Moving on to steak number 3, this is where it gets pretty tricky because we have these large amounts of fat in here and a good amount of kernelling fat around, but there's not really enough marbling to place it too high, so this will also fall as a low choice. Now that we've got our quality down, it's time to move into maturity. We have a chart here from A through E, A being the youngest and E being the oldest. When you have a prime, choice, select, or standard, you may only grade based on an A or B carcass. When you have a C, D, or E carcass, you can only grade commercial, utility, or cutter. Now, how do we figure out maturity? These are some prime examples of finding maturity in a carcass. What we have here is cartilage that is found in the thoracic. But, yeah, okay. These are some prime examples of finding the maturity in a carcass. Right here, we have these bright white parts, which are known as the thoracic buttons. The younger the calf, these are still cartilage. As you move into an older calf, this cartilage ossifies into bone. Notice here how they're still bright white, and as we move older, they get kind of more faint until they turn into bone. Moving on to yield grades. This is important because when you're a consumer and you're shopping in the grocery store and you're buying beef by the pound, you don't want to be buying just bone or fat. You want to be buying actual edible product. Yield grades are going to tell us how much edible product is actually in that cut of beef. Moving on to yield grades. This is found based on your preliminary yield grade, your kidney pelvic heart fat, ribeye area, and hot carcass weight. Now, how do you find your yield grades? We find it by using this formula. which is your preliminary yield grade minus your kidney part pelvic fat minus your ribeye area and adding your heart carcass weight. Now let's find out these variables. Today I'm going to be using a tool called a probe to find our PYG. Let's use ribeye number 3 as an example. So 3/4 of the way up, I'm going to line up our probe with the opposite of the ribeye, and here I get a 3.0. I'm then going to write that down here under our PYG, which we will subtract from our KPH. Now, moving on to the KPH. This is where things tend to get a little bit tricky, but in a contest setting, you're usually given the KPH. And in the real world, we have cutting edge technology to scan and find out the KPH, which is actually pretty accurate. For today, we're going to be using 1.5 as an example. But what does this mean? Moving on into our formulation, we can see that a KPH of 1.5 is equal to negative 0.4. So let's go ahead and plug that into our formulation. Now that we have our KPH, it's time to focus on our ribeye area. I'm going back in with my probe here, and each square counts for 1 square inch of red meat. So when I put this up to my piece of meat here, I can see that it's about 12.8 inches. And when we put that into our formula, we get negative 0.6. So now let's plug that into our formula. Moving on to our hot carcass weight. We find this by skinning, gutting, and draining the animal of its blood. Then we weigh it before we put it into the cooler. We knew that this animal weighed about 800 pounds before it went into the cooler. So 800 pounds in our formula translates to about 0.8. When we add all this together, we come out with 2.8. And that's how you find your yield. By understanding how carcasses are graded, I hope you now have a better picture of the real-world industry, and you might even use your new skills at your next trip to the grocery store. Thank you for your time.